Welcome to Data Founders, a series of interviews with entrepreneurs and investors who solve important challenges with data and data science. Today, I talk with Phil Libin, who created, among other things, created Evernote, invested as a general partner at General Catalyst, and now Phil works on a mission-driven product studio called All Turtles, and also he co-founded and leads a wonderful company called and we use their software today during our interview. It's a pleasure to have you here, Phil.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Awesome. I've mentioned some elements of your journey, and could you probably help us to connect these dots and tell us how did you arrive to the place where you are right now, to All Turtles, to what was it like?
Well, I'm I'm a computer engineer kind of by trade, and I've been working, programming, working with computers since I was pretty young. I started a couple of companies in Boston with some college friends of mine, and we just kept we kept starting things together. And Evernote was actually our third company. We wanted to build something for ourselves. Our previous two companies, we were doing software for banks and for kind of other customers, and we had good outcomes there. But we thought, okay, the third time around, we're kind of tired of trying to worry about what customers want. So why don't we build something that we want, build something for ourselves? So we started working on this idea of cognitive prosthesis, like a second brain, something to make you smarter. And then very quickly, we were in Boston, in Massachusetts at the time, and then we quickly ran into this other team that was led by this brilliant Russian-American entrepreneur named Stepan Pachikov in California, and we decided to merge together and kind of created the company called Evernote in 2007, 2008. And then I ran that for about 9 years, and then after about 9 years, like the company was doing pretty well, but I was kind of exhausted. We were close to 500 people. I thought it was a bigger company that I wasn't very good at running a big company like that, or at least a company that size. So we started the process to kind of replace myself, get someone who would be better. My goal was to stay involved with the product, keep doing sort of product strategy and design, which I enjoyed and I thought I was good at, but because somebody else to run the company day to day. But again, I lost control of that, of that process. We wanted to bring on a CEO, but then it felt very uncomfortable having me hanging around and doing producty things. So I wound up leaving completely, which was, intellectually the right thing to do, but emotionally kind of unpleasant. And I thought I would kind of semi-retire. So yeah, I got an offer to join General Catalyst to be an investor, which seemed like a great opportunity. It was a super cool job, but I don't think I have any particular talent at being a professional investor. So after 2 years, I kind of realized, well, I really want to build things again. So we started All Turtles, which is a product studio, as you said. The idea is to make worthwhile products for the world without really worrying about are they a startup, should they be part of a big company, let's just make products that solve real problems. And 4 years after that, it was in the beginning of the pandemic, we were all working from home and bored and everything was tiresome, and so we just started joking around, trying to have a little bit more fun on video, never intending to make it a real product. But it kind of snowballed. We just made something to make ourselves laugh. It snowballed from there and became And it kind of reminded me a little bit of the early days of Evernote, where again we were working on something for ourselves. And so it's like when you do that, you can go really quickly.
That's a fantastic journey. And one thing that strikes me along the journey is that as an Evernote user, I felt how people who built it loved it, right? Including you probably. So I felt the love of people to build things. And what I've seen in your journey is that you guys built different things in different formats. So the first business was a consulting, as far as I remember. The
Yeah.
Evernote, you merged two teams, and was born at the studio, right? So there are different formats. Sometimes they are not traditional venture capital backed startups. They become that kind of startups. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are what opportunities might be for, let's say, a data scientist or a data engineer to build something. Maybe there is something beyond launching a startup, and how to navigate between the different formats. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, I think a startup is a very specific kind of format, which isn't really optimal for many things. It's a pretty narrow structure. It's good for it's good if you need to attract significant amounts of outside capital, and you have the kind of the ability to do it. But and you have the right kind of team, which is again difficult to assemble. So the whole point of All Turtles is we kind of thought, well, we shouldn't push people to make startups. If someone just wants to make something worthwhile and they really know a lot about it, there should be a different structure that we can get really talented people to come and make things. And maybe it becomes a startup, maybe it doesn't. If you're one of the most talented, say, new filmmakers, let's say you just like graduated from film school, you're like a brilliant, Mozart level genius film director, you don't have to like make your own movie studio. You can, you want to go and you want to make something at Netflix or at, Amazon or something. And we want it to be the same kind of thing. We want it to be a place that could make very creative things with the best people in an environment that had a lot more structure than just, here's just, go make a startup. So we've worked on a few projects, I think 9 or 10, and a bunch of them have become startups. Because we, once we kind of saw that there was real traction, we thought, okay, well, we should raise external capital and make them, startups. But that isn't really the goal. The goal is to make high quality products. So, look, I think the good news is right now, or at least maybe very soon, kind of in the post-COVID world, there's far more opportunity for someone with an idea to build something because you no longer have the same kind of geographic constraints that you used to have. So, talented people with good ideas are are about to have a renaissance, I think.
And do you think there is a method or maybe a checklist for a wannabe entrepreneur to decide what role to choose? A studio, a startup, or maybe just to work in a unit of a large corporation and build something in 20% of the free time, right? So any heuristics to help to self-assess maybe?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is like building a startup or really creating anything that's meant to be at scale and kind of real is a really really difficult and most of the time very unpleasant journey. It's kind of brutal. It's hard, low chance of success, and so it isn't something that I would ever encourage anyone to do for the sake of like building a startup or being on the journey. Like it in and of itself is not generally a good experience. It hasn't been a very good experience for me or for most people I know. The only reason to do it is if you have a specific idea that you think the best way that the world needs this idea, you're passionate about it, and you can't find a different way to build it. So you think that the best way to do it is to do it in a startup. And even then, it's chances of success are very low. So you really have to want to see this thing exist. So I think there's like when I talk to people a lot of the time, who maybe self-identify as entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs or have questions about it, 50% of the time, maybe more, like they don't have a particular idea that they're trying to pursue. They're more interested in like, oh, I think I want to be a CEO. I think I want to start a company. And I would very much discourage people from doing that. Work at a normal job until you have something that you can't not do. You have something that you like, look, this has to exist in the world. I have to do it. Even if I'm going to fail and it's going to be the hardest job ever for the next 10 years, I still have to do it to have a shot. And so like, for me, it always starts with like, what do you want to build and why this thing, and why are you the person that should build it? And unless you have very crisp answers to that, I wouldn't even get to the next step of thinking about how to do it.
Yeah, I see. So you mentioned this idea thing. I assume you guys at All Turtle, you ideate a lot, you try different things. Do you think there are some approaches or mental models that you use and that may help entrepreneurs to select this idea?
Yeah. So we there's a few that we use. So I think broadly speaking, there's like maybe two categories of like startups, and I only really understand one of them. The other one is also very valid. I just don't don't really know how to think about it very well. The two categories are there's ideas that are problem solving, and then the other categories is ideas that are just purely, creative or artistic. So there's many great, things that are started, many great companies that are made that don't solve any particular problem. They just make something, beautiful or desirable, and that's fine. I don't like that's not a mindset that I think I really understand very well. So I can't advise on that. The other path of things that are solving problems, I think that's what we do. So everything we do at All Turtles is like very much in problem solving mode, and that starts with what's the problem. And so you don't have to go and find a problem. If you have to like look around for the problem, there's a very strong chance that you're going to find something that's not a real problem, because like if it's a real problem, you don't have to go looking for it. It's obvious. It's right there. Right? Usually like the real problems are not something that you have to think very hard about. What are the problems? They just see them. And, especially since you really shouldn't build something as a startup unless you really understand it very well. If you don't even know what the problem is, you're just like looking around trying to find somebody else's problem, your chances as a first-time entrepreneur of succeeding at that are very small. Like you should find something that's a very real and obvious problem in your life, in the life of people that you care about and that you understand and good connections with. And I'm usually suspicious about new problems, because I think most real problems have been around for a long time. Like maybe the solutions change, right? And that's the whole point of like technology entrepreneurship, is you find a problem that's been around for a long time, but it couldn't be solved before because something changed in the world, and now you can solve it. So the framework that we like, the framework that I like, is it's kind of the two week framework. So what I'd say is, trying to think about what to build, spend 2 weeks being very mindful, observe everything that you do. Just take a note of everything that you do, and find things that pay attention to things that you do like relatively frequently, but that you don't enjoy, that aren't good experiences. But you do them, but they're not good experiences. Make a list of those things. And then spend another 2 weeks doing that, also being very mindful for other people in your community, your friends, your family, other people that you really understand, like that you have a deep understanding of. What are the things that they do all the time that they don't like, that aren't good experiences? And then you'll have a list, and there's going to be hundreds of things, because like everyone does all sorts of things all the time that aren't good experiences. And then you go through that list and you find the ones that you think you can improve dramatically in a way that would have been impossible 2 or 3 years ago. Like something changed in the world that allows you to solve this thing that has probably been going on for a long time, but before you really couldn't make a big impact, but now you can, because why? I don't know, maybe there's a new technology, there's some advance in AI or computer vision, or maybe the world has changed so that it's now more socially acceptable. Like there's got to be specific reasons for why wasn't this thing solved 3 years ago? Why is this the year to do it? And and when you do that, you're going to wind up with real problems. You don't have to worry about having invented some problems that don't really exist. You're going to find real problems, and you're going to wind up with real problems that are probably solvable right now, but not before. And like that's a very good set. So I work on those things.
That's a fantastic framework for identifying the problems. What I hear quite frequently from researchers, especially researchers and data scientists, is that they try to go from the solution. They have a fantastic approach or a model or something like that, and then they try to sift through various problems to identify where the solution can be applied. Do you think it's a dead end, or somehow that model can work in certain conditions?
I mean, it's frequently a dead end. Everything is possible to make work. I mean, this is just a huge amount of luck involved in everything. So I'm sure there are successful companies that started that way, but it's usually a dead end. My second company started this way. So we had this brilliant co-founder, this legendary Silvio Macaulay, who's a computer science professor at MIT. And he had this approach that we all fell in love with. It was this very theoretical approach to doing some certain types of cryptographic proofs that had all sorts of massive advantages in lots of fields. And we just sat around thinking about, well, what can we apply this like amazing breakthrough to? And we came up with a whole host of things. And that was exactly the classic, like, there's a solution, what's the problem? and extremely difficult. We wound up selling that company. It was sort of a medium success, but it was like 8 years and all sorts of pivots to do that. And I just see that very, very, very frequently, especially in startups that come out of like universities or academia. It's like extremely common. There's a solution and you go searching for a problem. Or startups that happen when they spin out of big companies. Like a big company will invent something, some technology, and then they're trying to find a problem. And it's extremely rare that I think that works. So usually I'm very skeptical about that. I tend to stay away from those things just because, learned lessons. But it's possible. It's always, again, there's so much luck involved in things. It's always possible. And we've done plenty of those ourselves. Like we've had several projects at All Turtles and before, like we just wind up, because it's such an ever trap to fall into. You fall in love with the solution and then you go searching for a problem. Like we all do it. So like I find myself doing it and then being like, wait, I thought I was smarter than this. I'm not supposed to do this, but it happens. But yeah, we try very much to avoid it.
And I guess trying to apply a certain solution, try to find a problem for a solution is particularly, as you mentioned, particularly visible in the academia and the research world. So that kind of a trait or that kind of a feature makes for researchers harder to become entrepreneurs. But what do you think makes it for them? What are the strengths basically of researchers and engineers when they turn onto entrepreneurship? Because I assume you definitely worked with fantastic engineers and researchers, right? What does make them good, excellent entrepreneurs?
Well, I think look, I think lots, like every background can be good background for entrepreneurship. I also don't necessarily think that being an entrepreneur is like some kind of a special or privileged thing. Like it's not. There's plenty of people who aren't entrepreneurs who are, thank God they're not, because it doesn't matter. It's not like the most important job in the world. I think there's a thing that I think is really happening a lot and more in our society, which I find pretty disturbing. And I think there's some researchers and engineers maybe have less of a mindset like this, so they're better able to defeat it, which is a lot of people right now are just completely blind to counter narrative facts. So we've all been trained to make it really easy to be blind to anything we don't like. Because you never have to, like, you're clicking around online and you see something that doesn't fit your narrative of the world. It's so easy to just not to just click somewhere else and you're just gone. And so I think like we've all just trained our brains to be literally blind to counter narrative facts. We have a narrative, things that support it we seek out, and things that don't support it we don't like. It's like we're not even aware of them. It's like we have this like blindness filter that you just don't see things that don't support, that are run contrary to your narrative. But obviously, like, reality doesn't really care about what your narrative is. And it's important, I think, when trying to build something, when starting a company, to actually look at like all of the things that disagree with you and try to understand why and try to adjust your frame, and to be, to be very often contrarian, right? Like usually entrepreneurs are contrarians. They're not doing the conventional, at least the good ones. They're not following the conventional wisdom. They're going opposite of it, which makes sense, right? Structurally, if you think about it structurally, like, how does something become conventional wisdom? Like, something becomes conventional wisdom not because it's true. It becomes conventional wisdom because it's easy to repeat. It's easy for people to like repeat something because it has like some mimetic hygiene, which makes it like easy for this idea to stick. But that actually makes it likely to not be true or useful. So I think people that have that like intuitively contrarian streak, that like actually understand how to deal with facts that run against their narrative, are actually at a pretty big advantage in this field. But unfortunately, I think everyone's getting worse at it. Like, I just think like society is getting worse at this, and you can kind of see the effects everywhere. But maybe people specifically trained to look for contrary facts are going to be better at it than others.
Interesting. And I guess the challenge, or maybe the manifestation of the process of dealing with contrarian facts, maybe manifests itself in the customer development process. Maybe when you hear a lot of advice, you collect a lot of feedback, and as an entrepreneur, someone needs to decide, believe or not, apply or not apply this advice or this input, basically. How do you guys at All Turtles deal with customer development? What's your maybe process here at the high level, and
Yeah,
cannot be applied by entrepreneurs outside of the studio who work on just a single company.
yeah, it's definitely like talking to customers is definitely a big source of of error and mistakes. I think because you have to understand when you're talking to a customer or a prospective customer that they've got a narrative as well. So you can't literally just take everything they say seriously. It's all filtered through something. In general, I think there's two. The framework for this that we use is if you're trying to get someone to buy your product or to use your product or whatever, whether it's a person or a business or whatever, or even like for yourself, like for me, like when I decide that I'm going to like buy something, there's really two people that live in my head that make this decision. There's a guy who lives in my head who's very excitable. He likes things, and his job is to like find something that he's excited about. And if he finds something that he's excited about, he's like, yes, let's get this thing. And if he's not excited, he just shuts up. He doesn't say anything. And there's another guy that's conservative, that's trained to like say no to things, to prevent things. And his job is to find reasons to say no. And if he finds a reason to say no, he says, no, we're not going to get that. But if he doesn't find the reason to say no, he just stays quiet. And so in order for me to buy something, the guy who says yes has to say yes, and the guy who says no has to stay quiet. And I think it's and obviously if you're selling to a company, it's the same thing, except usually there's like physically different people. Like physically, like you have some champion who wants to do it and they're looking for a reason to say yes, and you have other people who are looking for reasons to say no. But I think the mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make is they think that these are two sides of the same thing, but they're not. They're actually almost completely disconnected. The reasons that someone says yes are usually very different from the reasons that somebody might say no. It's not that the absence of these things causes a no, or vice versa. And this is like a really key thing, I think, for people to understand. So when you're trying to make a product, especially if you're a startup, you're trying to sell it, you have very limited resources. You have to get some people in the company that you're trying to sell to really excited and say yes. And then you have to get the people whose job is to say no to just stay quiet. So how much effort? So you're trying to prioritize features. What should we build? What kinds of things? Should we spend time on this or on this or on this? How do you decide? Well, if you talk to a customer ahead of time, 100% of the feedback you're going to get are going to be features that are in the category of getting people to not say no, right? Because like no one knows what they'll love. Like the things that make people say yes are the unexpected, delightful things that they weren't expecting. By definition, they don't know what they are ahead of time. So if you ask people like, what would make you buy this thing? They'll just give you a long list of the things that if you don't have, people will say no. And then if you go build all of them, like you'll say, well, what do you need as a feature? And they'll say, oh, we need it to be compatible with this compliance standard. You'll say, okay, what else do you need? Oh, you need it to support single sign-in. What else do you need? Okay, we needed to be able to have administrator controls to allow for what employees can see. Okay, you build that. You build all these things. You go back to them. They're still not going to buy it because no one's going to say yes just because you have all these things. That the people who say no may stay quiet, but no one's going to say yes either. So you have to, as a startup, you have to spend as much of your energy as possible building things that are like the unexpected, delightful things that make people fall in love with your product, and as little as possible, but not nothing, as little as possible, satisfying the people to say no, just to get them to like stay quiet a little bit. And it's kind of a long answer to a short question, but talking to customers early, you have to understand that you're only going to learn the no bucket. You're not going to learn the yes bucket from customers. You have to learn the yes, like it's your job. It's your designer's job to come up with the things that are going to be delightful. You're never going to hear that from a customer. So in the beginning, you actually don't need to talk to customers very much. You need to talk a little bit to make sure you understand what their problems are and to understand what would definitely make them say no. But 80-90% of the ideas have to come from you in the early stages. When you're a much more mature company and a product, then you have to rebalance and you wind up doing a lot more with customer feedback. But early on, it's probably most startups probably spend too much time talking to potential customers in the early days, which I know is like a weird thing, contrarian thing to say, because I think all the advice is always to like talk to customers and I
Yeah,
think
that's true.
I think we do it too
Go
much.
outside the building and talk to customers. That's a classical advice, but I guess there is a caveat, and you just, I would say, brilliantly explain it, at least
Thanks.
how I would say about that. And the process of learning about things that excite someone, that are unexpected, delightful, this kind of things, it's not an easy, right? And someone needs to be in the company. I assume at the founding team, right, to do that. You probably can't outsource that, or can you, to hire someone to do that? What's your view on that? Why I'm asking this question is because frequently, again, I deal with, as an investor and as a friend, I deal with very technical teams, uh, two PhDs or two engineers launch a startup, and they have a limited exposure to other than technical things.
Yeah.
What's your advice to them? Learn, hire someone else, find a third co-founder, maybe. What's the best
I
thing?
mean, all of these things are possible, right? I think the well, the meta advice, I think, is probably more important than the actual advice. The meta advice is to like have a plan for how you're going to deal with advice.
Mhm.
Like one thing entrepreneurs get way too much of is advice, because it's just like advice from everywhere. And if all you're going to do is just shop around for advice, like you're just going to get advice until you hear the one that confirms your narrative, then the whole thing's pointless anyway. So, one of the things, a good skill to develop is like learning how to ignore advice, but not like ignore isn't right. How to like hear it and have that affect your decision, but in a way that is not necessarily following the advice. You're just using the advice to inform, to like build higher confidence in your own internal mental model of what to do. But in terms of this, like I very strongly advise people, given that disclaimer, that they're totally free to ignore it and probably should, not to try to start a company if they have a solution and they're trying to figure out what the problem is.
Mhm.
I highly recommend people start companies by starting with a really important problem that they want to solve, and be in love with the problem, and be ambivalent about the solution. Like, be willing to iterate through lots of different solutions. Don't be hung up on any particular solution. Just like what you really care about is making a dent out of this problem. You'll try this solution, you'll try that solution. Now, you should have a list of solutions that are worth trying, and all of them should fit that earlier criteria that I said, which is what's changed in the world that makes this solution possible this year, but it wasn't 3 years ago. Because any solutions that could have been done 3 years ago, if they haven't been, you got to ask, why not? Like, what is the change that, like, why is this possible now? And and then try those things. And I mean, everyone knows about real problems in their lives and the lives of people they care about and understand. So start there, unless you're really doing something that's much more about art, that's much more artistic, much more about fashion, which again is like totally valid. Obviously, there's many great companies that have started in this sort of art, fashion, purely creative sense. I just, like, my brain doesn't really grasp the frameworks for those. I'm not useful in talking about those things.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And do you think there is an opportunity to prepare oneself to become an entrepreneur somehow? Because what you describe regarding this problem, to me, it seems like a very natural, authentic way of launching a company. You do something, you see the problem, you love the problem, you can't sleep without solving it, and gradually you launch a company. Is there anything how a person can provoke this flow, basically?
Well, I mean, one thing that I think is like, I think it's interesting to not want to be an entrepreneur, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think this is a thing that's really worth like pushing on. It's like, are you doing this because you want to be an entrepreneur, because you somehow, like, because your narrative is you want to start a company? And that's just like a big red flag, because like
Mhm.
it's just not fun. Like, even if like failing at a startup, it's funny, like, so the very traditional wisdom is like, oh, startups will fail, especially in Silicon Valley. Startups fail, but it's okay. Failure is fine. You learn a lot from failure, right? Bullshit. Failure is terrible. It's really painful. It's really brutal. It really hurts you. Yeah, you can learn from failure, but you can also learn from Wikipedia. Like, there's cheaper ways to learn. So like, startup failure, is a really bad thing. Now, shouldn't discourage people. I'm just saying it's like it is a brutal, difficult slog that could be very damaging to families, to people around them. A startup success is even worse. Like being in a successful startup is actually significantly harder than being in a failing startup, and being in a failing startup is difficult. So like all of this is not to be taken lightly. And the best thing is to just be like, could I see myself not running this startup? And yeah, like, of course you should be able to. You know, if you can find, like, if you have a problem that you want to solve, then you can figure out a way to do it that doesn't involve, you know, making a startup, then sure, like do that. Just because, like, why would you subject yourself to this process? And if you want to, unless you, and you know, I'd be suspicious about what your real motivations are. But there are definitely some, you know, very often some problems you're like, look, no one else is going to do this the correct way, and the way I think is correct, so I'm going to do it. And I know it's going to be difficult, and you know, I'm just gonna do it anyway. And can you like prepare yourself? Yeah, I think like very good preparation early on is to just like not do it. Just like just try to like force yourself to like not be attached to the outcome that you make a startup, and just really try to figure out how else you would solve this problem. And like that's very, very useful and very important. And then kind of go through those steps. And then yeah, everything else is, you know, there's lots of advice about how to run companies everywhere on the internet. So just read all of it and, you know, figure out which ones you're going to ignore.
Then I would love to pick up on that ignoring advice point. What advice on ignoring advice? Like, learn to ignore advice in a proper way then.
Yeah.
Again, mental models, exercises that comes up on your mind.
You know, I think a lot of times when someone gives advice, it's not, it doesn't reflect what they did. It reflects like what they wish they had done. So very often, like people's, which is very useful to understand, but like people's advice is often has more to do with what they perceive their mistakes were, which isn't necessarily going to be anything like what your mistakes are going to be. So I think it's, you know, I think it's just absorbing things and deciding what you're going to try to optimize for. But understanding that it's not like someone giving you advice is not like, it's not that important, regardless of how like smart or famous this person is. It's useful, but very likely to be wrong. And B, like the worst thing you can do is just like keep getting advice until you hear the one that you like, because then you already knew what you liked ahead of time. You didn't need to like waste anyone's time in this. And obviously, if you talk to enough people, eventually you're gonna hear the thing that you like to hear. So if that's what you're doing, then you know, whatever. The specific thing that I found very useful when I ask for advice is I like to ask very specific questions. Like I was really lucky. I got a chance to meet many years ago. I was speaking at a conference, and I saw that Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft at the time, was speaking after me. So I sent him an email. I didn't know him, but I like guessed his email address. I sent him an email saying, "Hey, so I see we're both in Korea. I'd love to just like ask you some questions about CEO stuff if you have like 5 minutes." And so he responded. He said, "Sure." So I talked to him a little bit at the conference, but then he said, "Hey, we don't really have a lot of time, but if you want, just like fly to Redmond, and you know, we'll spend the day together. You can ask me whatever you want." So I said, "Great." So a few weeks later, I flew over there. So we spent like 5-6 hours just talking about stuff. It was really, really good. He was very generous with his time. And I came with very specific questions. Like he said, like, my board is like starting to put pressure on me to hire a CFO. What does a CFO do? And like, that's a good question for like to ask, you know, a CEO of a large successful company. And like, I really wanted to know that. And he like, well, there's like 7 different types of CFOs in my experience. And it's this and this and this and this. It was like amazing. It's like so good. I said, well, you know, I have, right now, I think maybe I have too many direct reports. Like, how many direct reports should I have as a CEO? And we like talked about that. Like very like specific things. So like I came prepared with, you know, 10 different questions. I got to ask 5 of them, and we had a really great conversation. And I think in general, like people like being asked smart questions. So, and usually are in my experience are very generous with their time if you come with legitimate questions. So yeah, I think it's also like advice is, yeah, come prepared with good questions that are actually like specific and actionable, and will be a lot more useful.
Fantastic, thank you, Phil. And you're very generous with your time today, but I'm sure that it's not endless.
It's my pleasure.
Probably the last question on my side. We've talked about different things quite a lot, but is there anything, any theme, or any topic, any question that I didn't ask, but you believe should be not I shouldn't ask it, and this topic deserves to be discussed?
Well, I think the thing that I'm really very excited about right now is I think there's this massive change that's happening in the world right now, and I think a bigger change than anything I've ever lived through. And so this is like a very good time to really start, lots of new things. I think the big change that's happening is like very much accelerated by COVID. But well, I think in the next few months, once COVID is hopefully much more under control, like this is really going to take hold, is this decoupling of where we live and where we work for many people. There's already hundreds of millions of people right now today worldwide that can make the decision about how they want to live and where they want to live independently from what their job is. And that was never the case before. Like never before in the history of the world have a significant number of people been able to make that decision separately. I've never been able to, I've never in my life thought, where do I want to live? Because it was never even a question. Like I was going to live where the job was. So the question was always like, where do I want to work? But now I can think about, well, where do I want to live? And not only me, but like everyone who works in my company and almost everyone who's in the knowledge field. And that is a profound change that like people are only barely starting to understand the ripple effects of this. It's already a few hundred million people this year. Probably within a decade, it's going to be like 2 billion people. It's going to change the way we structure everything, the way we think about retirement and education and cities and healthcare and houses, like everything changes. This is the changiest period ever. I think this is a bigger transformation than, I started my first company during the dot-com. The original dot-com like growth, it was like the late 90s. It was like everyone was getting connected to the internet. That was a major change. This is bigger. I started Evernote around the mobile revolution. Everyone had smartphones. That was a massive change. This is bigger. I think this change is the biggest change yet. There's no, actually, I don't know about in other languages. In English, there's no good word. There's no positive word in English that I can find for people who like change. There's many positive words for people who resist change, for people who want to protect, be conservative, like traditional, like many of those have good connotations. There's no good connotations in English for a word for someone who loves change. There's some real negative words like opportunist. Like an opportunist is like kind of a negative word. It's like, yeah, you take advantage of opportunities. Like, okay, I guess that's a bad thing. I'm not sure why. I don't know about in German. Maybe there's like words that mean it. But the core entrepreneurial trait is actually someone who seeks out and who loves change. Because change is like creates the conditions for which you can really improve the world. And I think that's the main thing. I think like people in your audience who kind of self-identify as people who like, they see change and they're like, oh, great news. Everything is changing. This is great. And who run towards it. Like that's the mindset. And people who generally react to change, which is, 95% of people react to change as being like, oh, this is bad. Things are changing. Like that's not a good entrepreneurial trait. So that's kind of my last thing about that.
Yeah, that's I guess a great theme to finish for today. A lot of interesting insights and things to think about. Thank you very much, Phil, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot of good news from all turtles and from
Well, hopefully. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.